Hello and welcome to this special edition of the India Development Debate. The good news first. The economy is picking up pace, giving hopes that the aftershocks of the note ban and GST are a thing of the past. GDP growth jumped to 6.3% in the September quarter from a low of 5.7% in the previous 3 months, giving a big breather to the government and market players alike. And the icing on the cake is the stellar performance of the all-important manufacturing sector, which grew at 7% in Q2 compared with just 1.2% growth in the previous quarter. Mining and electricity generation were the other key growth propellers during the 3 months to September.
Indeed, and now the bad news. We've given you the good news, it's time to balance it out. And that's from the farm fields. The agriculture sector continues to be a laggard with a meager 1.7% growth in Q2. Non-payroll government expenditure is not impressive either, while the all-important construction sector has fared badly too. What do the numbers really tell? Have we already seen the worst effects of demonetisation and GST? Will the next 2 quarters see a big bounce back? The big picture behind the big Q2 GDP numbers is a big debate right here on the India Development Debate this evening. I'm Supriya Srinath right here in New Delhi, and joining me in Mumbai is my colleague Sandeep Gurumurthy. We've got a stellar panel of 3 political people right here representing 3 political parties and 3 big views. Nalan Kohli represents the ruling bench, the BJP, MB Gaura from the Rajiv Gaura from the principal opposition, the Congress, and Yogendra Yadav, founder and national president of the Swaraj India. Thanks very much for being with us, gentlemen. Let's start with you, Mr. Gaura. 6.3% GDP growth, 6.1% GVA for Q2. Much over and above 5.7 that we did see. Has this put a full stop to the gloom and doom narrative that India was witnessing for the last few days, if not months?
Supriya, basically we're all relieved that the economy is picking up again. But what is the real situation? What would have been the trajectory of this economy if it had maintained a certain growth level before the twin blows of demonetization and incompetent implementation of GST? Essentially, we've lost about 1 to 2% of economic growth, and that is clearly visible when you look at the year-on-year numbers. So while we see a little uptick now, and that is a source of relief, we have to wait for the next 2-3 quarters before we can say that this is actually a trend. Otherwise, we've been in a continuous decline, and therefore, there is no reason to, I wouldn't use words like doom and gloom. We just say, come on, get your act together, and let the economy, it takes a special genius to mess up the kind of economy that we have, the innate potential of India, and that special genius has been demonstrated by Prime Minister Modi and Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. And fundamentally here, when you look at agriculture, this is really frightening and worrisome. Here you have a sector where half the population is dependent on that sector, and you see continuous declines.
Rajiv Gaura, we will...
imagine the kind of agrarian distress, the kind of impact this is going to have
okay.
on jobs and actually manufacturing thankfully has picked up, but agriculture, construction, manufacturing, on average they've come up to 4.4%.
Sure.
Now that has
Rajiv
to grow
Gaura, if I may
much
just
more.
interrupt you, agriculture is something we want to talk about. Rajiv Gaura, if I may interrupt you, agriculture is something we want to talk about, and I'm sure Yogendra Yadav and the panel will have things to say on that as well. But I just want to get opening comments on the big picture, and then we'll get down to some of the specific sectors. And I promise you, agriculture is something we will touch upon. Nalan Kohli, it's good to see the Congress cheer this growth in the economy, this rebound. We've seen the former Finance Minister Paniappan Chidambaram tweet the fact that he welcomes this revival in the economy. But even as we do that, like Rajiv Gaura pointed out, we can't lose sight of the fact that this was an economy that's grown at 6% for the first half of this financial year, as against 7.7% for the first half of the last financial year. So would you agree that this celebration is probably unwarranted right now? This is just an economy that's now getting back on track after 2, some may call structural reform, some may call one was a self-inflicted damage and the other, of course, was a structural reform. Nalan Kohli, your opening comments.
That's okay. Depends who's speaking. That's the critical thing. If it's the Congress, obviously they will have a point of view which is diametrically opposite to us. That's what they do. They will oppose it. But with regarding, I think it doesn't take even an economist. It takes just basic understanding to know that in an economy, if it's going down by 5 quarters and it's suddenly in the 6th is showing growth upwards, and some of it robust, 7% in manufacturing, 7.1% in services, it means that definitely things are in place despite despite the fact that in November we had demonetisation, which was a conclusive hit of the cash economy. And we know that India is transacting cash economy. No guesses why. The Congress party has been against it all through, against every move against black money, in fact. And on the other side is despite GST coming in, which is a massive disruptor too, changes the rules of the games and changes the nature in which you do business. Now let's look at the next. It takes a special genius, as Mr. Gowda said, of the Prime Minister, naming the Prime Minister and Finance Minister to ruining, according to him, the economy. 2014, what was the GDP when they demitted office? 6.4%. 6.4% is what they demitted office on. It went up to 7.1. It is back to 6.3. In the meantime, while we are talking this, in the first time in 14 years, after 3 years of efforts by this government under Prime Minister Modi and Finance Minister Jaitley, we see the first upgrade the Moody's upgrade about India's status, credit rating. You see a 30 rank upward movement of ease of doing business. Is things perfect? Certainly not. That's why we are changing the fundamental nature of doing things. And are they showing results? Absolutely yes. And the last thing on agriculture, since he did it, 33% is the growth rate in tractor demand. Now, I don't think Sonia Gandhi or Rahul Gandhi's preferred mode of transport is a tractor.
No, Mr. Kohli, one second. Mr. Kohli, we will touch upon agriculture. Agriculture is something we want to dedicate some airtime to. We will touch upon agriculture and we will talk about that in greater detail. Yogendra Yadav, one side of the coin is the Congress party, the other side is the Bharatiya Janata Party. Let's talk to you about what Padayappan Chidambaram says while acknowledging that it's relieving to see the economy pick pace. He says, wait for 3 quarters before reaching a definitive conclusion. But what you perhaps can't deny is the reversal that's happened. Even if it's a pause, it's a reversal that has happened. Is it safe to assume that the demons of demonetization and the disruption on account of the GST or the GST-induced slowdown is behind us?
Don't know, but first thing first, it's good news. A reversal, even a quarterly reversal of what was a 5-quarter trend should be welcome. It's the economy. The question is, what do we compare this 6.3 with? We compare it to the last quarter. Of course, it's up, but who expected it not to go up? I mean, that was most expected. You compare it to expectations. From what I could read in the last couple of days, the expectations was that it would end up slightly higher than it has ended up with 6.3. Or you compare it with long-term secular trend. You compare it with what the economy would have been, should have been. That's a counterfactual comparison. And I thought in the most serious debates, you do a counterfactual comparison, which is to say, what was the economy doing in overall terms? And but for the intervention of the government, we heard a lot of spin just now, but for the intervention, give it any name, where we would have been. So to my mind, it's only fair to conclude that yes, we have recovered from a certain bottom. We've gone up, which is nice. We are nowhere close to where we could have been, where we should have been. Both these things, I think, cannot be denied. What we really need to understand are its implications for key sectors, because GDP, as economists all over the world have said repeatedly, doesn't tell you very much about well-being of the people. We need to look at key sectors, we need to look at key constituencies and break it up and see what would it do to key constituencies. That's probably what we should be looking at.
Okay, and we are going to do that. Let's start off with manufacturing. And Rajiv Gowda, again, why is the Congress being skeptical? Because manufacturing, we've seen a very strong sign of revival. This is, and this will have an impact on job creation. The fact that we've grown at over 7% this quarter, that's an extremely encouraging sign and a sign that investments are near to breaking ground and jobs are there to be, will slowly now get created in the economy.
Manufacturing is much more complicated than just the number that we are looking at. There is this whole issue of capital investment. How much is gross fixed capital formation growing by? And how does that compare with previous numbers? And if you find that private sector credit growth is also not enough, then this may be restocking after the GST introduction. And so this is not necessarily, as a result, something that may be sustainable. So that's why we are looking at all these numbers and saying, okay, that's good that this has seen an uptick. Manufacturing is important on the jobs front. government, an area where this BJP government has absolutely failed. And let us look and see in the future whether this kind of an uptick will actually be sustainable. And until then, we have to be skeptical. That's the point that I would like to point to everyone out here, and the nation for that matter, that this is a welcome uptick, but it's an uptick over when you're just climbing out of a deep hole that the government had plunged the economy into. The real natural trend for the larger Indian innate growth of the economy would have been 7% plus, 8% plus under the new numbers. If you go back to the old numbers, it would, this is not as good as the 7.6% that the UPA delivered over 10 years on average. And essentially, that is the question. How do we get out of this kind of hole? Are we in a position? There is an effort to tinker here, tinker there, possibly influence, ratings, who knows? But the basic point is there are real human costs and real losses to the economy that we have suffered as a result of this government's incompetence, and that is 1.5 to 3 lakh crore rupees worth of lost opportunity, lost jobs, lost hopes. That is the real damage that this government has done, and we are hoping that we'll climb out of that, and that India will re-emerge, in spite of this government.
I think we've spoken about this in the past. I think we need to talk about the numbers today. And I think we need to address the fact that some things are looking up, some things are not. We've got to be cognizant of that. So I just want to keep the debate on track. Nalin Kohliwal, I think your worst critics will say, let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope the economy begins to look up from here. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that happens to be agriculture. It's grown at 1.7%. The present crop, which is Rabi, we're not getting very encouraging signs from that as well. How are you going to explain the fact that agriculture, which is the mainstay of a big section of our population, isn't encouraging? And many people will say, is the government of the day cognizant of the fact in the rural economy? Are you cognizant of the fact on India's farms?
Well, I'm going to come to agriculture, but I need to make a comment back on Rajiv. When they say that we should be skeptical and we should hope for the best, that's correct. Nobody as an Indian can deny that that is the correct approach. But when they start qualifying it further, then one has to clear the confusion that they're seeking to create. If we have to go by averages of growth rates, like under the UPA Congress they constantly do so, then happily we should take the average of all the Congress-ruled years and see what is the average under them versus us. End of the day, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee demitted office, that is the growth rate we left it at. What we inherited was 6.4. Judge us when we finish our term and when we go to the people again. Obviously, that is the best way of comparing it. That's the only way of comparing it. This is a mid-term position. Number two, what the economy could have been is also a euphemism by the Congress party to say we would have preferred the old way of doing business. That's not acceptable to this government. And that this government has made it clear. That means the cash economy should not be tackled. That also means that we should not push that people come into the transactions of white money, which is what you're seeing in terms of income tax returns, in terms of income tax pays, in terms of GST, which is also not the old system, where there was an average high rate of 31%, which is now down to 28%. So it's a fundamental shift. Now when you go to agriculture, yes, agriculture is in distress. Anybody who says that it's not will be making a fool of it. That's the clear situation. It's not a distress of the creation of when Modi ji came on. It's a historical distress that needs to be corrected because a significant part of our population is there. So our efforts being made, if I look at it from a state-wise thing, the BJP ruled states, whether it's Gujarat, whether it's Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, now of course Bihar, BJP, if they're not in between, back again, all of it, there are states that are doing well in agriculture, there are states that are not doing well in agriculture. If I look at from the government, are we looking at crop insurance? It is dramatically up because that's what brings in a massive debt cycle. Are we looking at credit? It is still moving. Are we looking at soil health cards? It is a far better position than ever before. So steps are being taken. The market system, there are problems in the agricultural sector. But if I only look at, say, water, because we have the Gujarat elections, so I'll speak of Gujarat. 1991, we had 3,000 check dams. 2011, 1,65,000 check dams. That means land obviously got water. But would you say that all agriculture has been solved? Not yet. Steps are being taken. And you can't wish away the problems that have fundamentally been brought in the economy, including agriculture, over many years of neglect.
Okay. Yogendra Yadav, I'm going to let you come in on that because you have obviously traveled extensively and you've campaigned with farmers highlighting the rural distress. 1.7% growth, is that reflective of the situation on the ground? And would it be fair to say that the steps taken so far, like crop insurance that Nalin pointed out, are incremental? And again, we have these band-aid solutions like farm loan waiver, which every state government, whether BJP or Congress, is offering farmers. I wonder if it really does any good to the marginal farmer. Do you believe that on agriculture as a whole, not enough has been done, and that reflects in this number that's come out of 1.7%?
Let's first focus on the number and then get into everything else like soil health card, because that's not what's actually in the picture today. Today we are not discussing farm loan waivers, we are not into discussing soil health card. I can discuss it, but let's first focus on numbers. 1.7% is bad. It was more than 4% earlier, so it's actually declined. I do not have one figure. If anyone else on the panel has, I would really benefit because I couldn't get it from the net today. Last quarter, we saw something very, very unusual in agriculture, namely that the nominal growth figures were lower than the real figures. This, as you can see, happens very rarely. And this happened because there was a negative growth in prices. That's the point I want to emphasize. Agriculture GDP numbers are a function of two things: how much production multiplied by what kind of price. What we have here is not so much that the production is not keeping pace. The real problem from the point of view of the farmer is that the prices are not coming. Prices have slumped in the last Rabi season, which must be reflected in these figures because these figures are up to September. The last Rabi figures were that there was price crash across commodities, across crops. Farmers failed to realize prices. And this was a disaster for farmers. It wasn't bad crop. This was a good harvest. But prices had collapsed. And that is a question we should be asking. Why is it that farmers do not get prices? Mr. Kohli is in a sense broadly right to say, yes, it's a long-term problem. But please remember, Mr. Kohli, that agriculture growth figures in the last 3 years have been distinctly lower than what they were earlier. I'm not saying this is simply Congress versus BJP. Of course, the droughts contributed to it. There were other things as well. But allow me to say that, this regime's complete indifference to the state of farmers, this government's complete almost unawareness of what demonetisation would do to the farm sector has contributed and made it worse. On the other point, since Mr. Kohli brought it in, the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, please take out time to travel, Mr. Kohli. It's a disaster. The only beneficiary of this scheme have been some private insurance companies. I'm happy to share figures with you. On soil health card, yes, good scheme. Have the farmers benefited so far? Those are the kind of questions we should be debating. All this growth that we talk about, is it really going to the people who should be getting it? The answer is no, and the story continues even now. The Kharif harvesting season that's over, which is now being sold, farmers are once again losing across crops. In the top 8 crops of this season, the farmers have lost at least 35,000 crore rupees below the MSP promised by the government.
Right.
These are the figures we need to debate today and not get into too much of a spin.
Okay, very quickly, Nalin Kohli, I'll ask you to respond to that, and also the point, just 60 seconds there, the larger point that Yogendra Yadav is making, that, farmers are not getting enough for their produce, and this was a political promise that your government had made, and then there was you even mentioned it in the Supreme Court, and then there's been a U-turn of sorts.
Three quick responses. A, I'm not a domain expert. So therefore, if I need to speak on the specific that Mr. Yadav is saying, I obviously need to get that data, study it, and then speak on it. So therefore, I would not qualify myself to either accepting nor rejecting. He may be right, he may not be right. But without that information, I'm not going to at least step out and make a comment. The second part to it is in terms of prices. Yes, that is exactly one of the critical areas where there is a gap. The farmer doesn't get the produce price. On the other hand, when the consumer pays, there's sometimes a huge gap. And this is an anomaly that has been historically there for too long, and that needs to be broken. and that needs to be corrected. That is exactly what they've been talking about, the various things, whether it's with regard to the mandis or whether it's regard to the e-marketing or trying to get information across. But I am myself starting by saying that I will not at any level say that agriculture is in the manner as it should be. Certainly not. There is efforts are being made, but to say that we are in the pink of health, no way. That would be a statement that would not be born on fact or even would not be correct to make.
Okay, let's look at the larger picture then. Rajiv Gowda, how does this set things up for 2019? Many would argue that this government has seen slow growth when it could afford to see slow growth. Even at a worst case scenario, we're looking at the economy growing at 6.5% for this financial year, and from there on in FY19 and the year after, we'll actually see far stronger growth. How does this set things up? Do you think, does this blunt the narrative, blunt the sort of opposition-led, criticism of this government on account of economic mismanagement? Because come 2019, people aren't going to be talking about demonetisation. They probably will be talking of an economy that could well be growing at 8%. Rajiv Gowda.
People will be talking in 2019 about job creation. What has this government done in terms of job creation? There are, you know the numbers. What kind the promises of 2 crores of jobs a year that Mr. Modi made versus the actual number of people who are being employed. And essentially, if that issue is not addressed, you will see the kinds of unrest that is already there in different parts of the country, the Patidar agitation in Gujarat being one example. So people are going to say, yes, these numbers sound fine. There is some uptick after the disastrous downturn post-demonetisation and bad implementation of GST. But what does this mean for me? What does this mean for the farmer? What does this mean for the farmer's son who wants a job or a daughter who wants a career? And essentially people will say, this government has absolutely failed to deliver. The economy may be picking up, and that's what we all hope for, but we are not seeing, look at the unemployment numbers. They are actually continuously on a decline. And therefore, unless people start talking about, oh yes, this everyone's become an entrepreneur or something like that, that is not true, and that is not something that can actually save the nation. We need to find ways to ensure that job creation happens, and that is the human angle that will be central in 2019. And it's very, very late. It's not midterm in this government's term. It's 3.5 years into this government's regime, and 2019 is very, very soon. So we will see how much ever there are efforts at headline management, people will say, what happened to me? Okay, and that's the issue that's going to be center.
Right. Right. Mr. Yadav, I need to wrap this up, so I'm going to give you a question and then a final question with Nalin Kohli. And the question to you really is, the whole correlation between growth on one hand and political dividend on the other, and also the narrative. The narrative so far has been that the government has been attacked on exactly the economic management. And if things begin to look up from here on, does the opposition lose that ammunition?
In my previous birth, I used to look at these things, relationship between GDP and vote figures, and I can tell you the correlation is very poor. And for the simple reason that probably Rajiv Gowda has also hinted, and I'm sure Nalin Kohli would also agree. Ordinary voter in India does not look at GDP figures. So when the figures were very bad last quarter, ordinary people don't look at it. And when there is a marginal improvement now, ordinary voter is not going to look at it. An ordinary voter looks at her household. What is my condition? What have I got? Has my situation improved? Ordinary voter looks at jobs. Have I got the jobs that were promised? And an ordinary farmer would ask a very simple question. My Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, had made me a very clear promise. And I want Mr. Kohli to respond to that, because for once I have a BJP spokesperson who's very reasonable and factual. Mr. Modi made a very clear promise, and the BJP manifesto said that, and every farmer in this country knows it thanks to efforts of people like us. He said, we shall ensure cost plus 50% as minimum support price. He clearly said it. And then within a few months, in January 2015, the government says, no, it's impossible. This will distort market. We don't want to even look at it. Then ordinary voter will ask, what happened, Mr. Modi? Why did you renege on your promise? What have you delivered to me so far? You say my income will double by 2022, lovely idea, but what has it improved so far in the 3 years? Why is it not even 10 to 15% by now? Those are the questions which would concern an ordinary voter, and that answering those questions, to my mind, would be very difficult for this regime.
Okay, Rajiv Gowda says jobs is what will determine the outcome of 2019. Yogendra Yadav says the farmer is going to ask tough questions based on promises made. Nadan Kohli, I'm going to let you have a quick last word. Respond to the point that both Rajiv and Yogendra Yadav made. And if I may add a quick last question based on what the Prime Minister said this morning at a summit in New Delhi, when he said that, you know, he may have to pay a political price for his economic decisions and that some of these structural reforms will take a toll. What was he referring to?
No, I think every audience is different. So when he's speaking there, and as we are speaking, say, on GDP numbers, and that's a correct figure, the GDP numbers quarter by quarter doesn't have a direct reference to the vast majority of the country, because they are not looking at the GDP to GDP. That's exactly how voters do, and that's not rocket science. Everyone on this panel and beyond this panel knows exactly how the voter thinks. And that is why political parties make their strategies ways to win elections, not on academic exercises. So let's come back to what are the questions. Those questions that Mr. Yadav asked, or even if Mr. Gowda is pointing towards, those questions are relevant in 2019 at the end of the term. And obviously, these questions will be answered, or people will judge us on that. Because no less than in 2014, when we assumed office, Prime Minister Modi said, I will go with my report card. We are on record. We say we will go with our report card. And the only way to know whether people have accepted what we have done or not done will be the outcome of the 2019 elections. From the Congress party's perspective, or any other party's perspective who's opposed to us, they will celebrate if they, according to them, they are assessing that nothing is right. And in 2019, they will know for sure whether their assessment is right or our assessment is right, because people will decide, not you, me, or any one of them.
Indeed, that's a very sane note to end on, that GDP growth may not grab the voters, but it's the people of India who will eventually decide. And on that political note, we are keeping our fingers crossed for growth to pick up. The politics will carry on, but I think the fate of this country is a lot higher and bigger than that. Thanks very, very much, Rajiv Gowda, Nadan Kohli and Yogendra Yadav for joining us right here on ET Now with your perspective on GDP growth and what it really means as far as Indian polity is concerned.
Don't go anywhere. We're back with lots more right here on ET Now.